bell has rung for us this morning. We're going to begin here in the book of Luke. We'll begin in chapter 4. Just a moment. Glad to have you here today. Looking forward to our study, book of Luke. We'll begin that shortly. As we normally do, let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we're grateful for the day. We're thankful for our blessings, for life that you've given us, and for the things that we have. And we're thankful for this time of study, especially when we use it to our advantage. And may we worship you next hour in spirit and in truth. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. We have been, our endeavor anyway, to get through as much of Luke as we can. But instead of maybe looking at it verse by verse as is an option, not having as much time as we might need to do that, we're looking at just some difficult or challenging passages from the book of Luke. We started in an introduction. We've gone through the first 3 chapters or so. We'll look at 3 more today if we are able to get to them. But of course, as we have, I certainly hope to have comments and questions. And if we don't get through 3 of them, then that's okay. There's always next week, Lord willing. Chapter 4, verse 41 is where we will begin. And as we usually do, we'll read the verse, look at the context, and then see why it's a challenge perhaps. And then we'll see what we can find from it. Chapter 4, verse 41 will be the one that we do first here, looking at refusing confession. Chapter 4, verse 41. There's the passage there on the screen in front of you, but we'll read it here together. Chapter 4, verse 41, the devils also came out of many, crying out and saying, "You are Christ, the Son of God." And he, rebuking them, suffered them not to speak, for they knew that he was Christ. This is, I hope maybe you can see a little challenge here. The question that I have is, why would Jesus refuse someone calling him Jesus? And this is not the only time that Jesus tells someone not to say that he is the Christ. It's not the only time that someone else, that Jesus only said this. You'll remember that Paul rebuked a woman who had an evil spirit and caused the evil spirit to come out of her. He didn't want her saying that this is Paul, that, listen to him, he's God's messenger. And sometimes you'd read that and you'd think, well, why in the world would you not want someone saying the truth? Regardless of who it is that's saying it, truth is truth. And why would you not want that to happen? Why is it here, for example, that Luke chapter 4 tells us about Jesus, among other things, here in the context, had caused demons to come out of people? And here we have those saying, "You are the Christ, you're the Son of God." And then he tells them not to say those things. And it says there particularly because they knew that he was Christ. So I guess the challenging part, or suppose the question that we can ask about this, is why is it that Jesus refused this confession here? Why is it that he did that? Because, it had happened earlier, these demons perhaps saying that he was the Christ. Notice verses 34 and 35 of the same passage. The ones here in the demons here saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Are you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Hold your peace and come out of him." And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him and did not hurt him. And so again, we have another section here. So real close right here in the book of Luke, we have these demons or these possessions, and the ones that are possessed are crying out that Jesus is the Son of God. Before we look at why he told them not to, let's maybe ask the question, why do you think these demons were saying these things? Why do you think they were confessing him on this occasion or other occasions here? I mean, obviously it's true here, but why were they? It seems like, and of course we can't know how it's said, but it seems like they're very adamant about it. And you are the Christ. We know who you are. And remember the one that was called Legion. When Jesus came to him, he said, "Have mercy on us. What have we to do with you? Why have you come to torment us before the time?" Why do you think they said that here? Perhaps, and that's a great, I'm glad we have different perspectives here, because when I read this, I don't really get sarcasm, but we don't really know how they said it. Perhaps they did. You remember that Satan told Jesus, "If you're the Son of God, throw yourself from this pinnacle. If you're the Son of God, cause these stones to be turned to bread." To me, that's dripping with sarcasm. I don't hear that here, but that doesn't mean that's not what they said. That's a possibility, sure. What else? What's another reason why they said this to him? great perspective there. Perhaps to interrupt his work. We got two things I've never even thought about. Yeah, absolutely. There might be some pausing of it right here. There might be some trying to throw a stumbling block in the way here, not just for Jesus, but to those that heard it, which might speak a little bit towards why Jesus told them not to, say those things. There might be being sarcastic about it. Oh, look, this is Jesus. He's the Son of God. We know who he is. It might have something to do with trying to stop his work, or at least keep it from progressing as quickly as it was. Anybody else? Good thoughts there. Fear? Fear, what are they afraid of? Sure. Yeah, I think that's part of it as well. Gary, you got something? Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah, it wasn't the time for them to be saying it. You're right. I want to go back to this fear issue. I think that to me that's kind of what it is. Remember go back to the occasion there when there were the individuals, and they were called Legion because there were many, and Jesus cast them into the swine that were there on that hillside. Jesus had the power, obviously, to cast these individuals out. And where did these demons, or some have called them, some think that they are the spirits of the departed spirits of people, that they're not necessarily like devils like we might think about them, but rather they're the spirits of departed individuals who have died, who were like the rich man in torment of Luke 16. And they've been released for a time to inhabit or possess people. And whether they are, former beings living on earth is not really necessary. But Jesus had the power to cast them back where they came from. And so the idea here that it's in my mind anyway, and I think these others are great perspectives, and I certainly could be wrong, but I think there is a hint of fear here that they know that if they cross a line, or if they talk out of turn, or if they say something that is looked at as wrong, then he's going to immediately cast them out. And where do they have to go? Back where they came from. And as much as modern culture likes to think of demons or the devil celebrating in torment, that's not what that place is for. They are not loving it there. They are in torment themselves. That was hell was created for the devil and his angels. And so it's not a place for them to, celebrate and that sort of thing. So to me, the reason why they are saying, oh, this is Jesus, this is the Son of God, is because they don't want Jesus to cast them out. They don't want to go back to where they came from for at least for a time. They even said there in that passage where they were talking about we are legion, why have you come to torment us before the time? It's not time for us. We're still enjoying, not being in torment. And so cast us into these swine or something like that, what he did. But now let's ask the question, why? Why is it that he told them not to say these things? Why is it that he told them not? If it's because he doesn't want them to interrupt his work, or because they are saying it sarcastically, I think that's pretty obvious. But I think if it's that fear part, they are literally, if they are afraid, they are fearful of what Jesus can do, and so they are as loud as anyone proclaiming that Jesus is the Son of God. And I think Gary touches on that here. It's the idea of who you're associated with. I know that in our culture and in our social media culture, that sort of thing, you'll hear someone say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Even those people that are famous, even when they do terrible things, except for just a couple of other things, just getting their name out there is enough, and they'll be famous. That's not what Jesus' purpose was, to be famous, however. There's seems to be something about the association of being associated with these demon-possessed individuals. Let's go to Matthew 12, verse 24. Someone read that for us when you get there. Matthew 12, verse 24. So here in Matthew 12, Jesus, of course, is performing these miracles, casting out demons, and the Pharisees see it, and they know that there's no other. This is miraculous. There's no other way to define it or describe it there. So they have to ascribe power here to someone, and they said, well, he's casting out demons. He's doing it by the power of Beelzebub, the prince of the demons. And so Jesus here, of course, has his response to that and how just ridiculous that is. But the idea here is that Jesus doesn't want to be guilty by association. Even when those who are demon-possessed are claiming that he is the Son of God, that he has power, probably some of the loudest voices about who he actually was, he did not want people to associate his work with these individuals, which might have put a stumbling block in the way of some here. Because these, some of these who were demon-possessed, clearly there was a problem there, claiming that it was Jesus. That might hurt his ministry, especially the longer it went and the further away from these places he went. There would be a time for Jesus to reveal himself, and even James talks about the demons believe there's one God and they tremble. There's coming a time when he was going to reveal himself. But here, it seems to be early on, he didn't want the wrong impression about who he was. He would tell other people. I always found that interesting. Not demon-possessed people, but, sometimes he'd be privately. He would heal someone, and he would say, don't tell anybody who I am, which is weird to me. Why wouldn't he? That's why he came, was to show who he was. There seems to be a reason here early on that he doesn't want it widely known who he is. He's kind of laying the groundwork, and a demon-possessed individual would not be good publicity here. And it certainly would give the wrong idea about who he was, knowing that he only had, 3 years, basically to do what he came to do. He didn't want these kind of hiccups along the way. And so he would, don't say that. Don't speak about that. Don't say who that, even though they knew who he was. I think the same could be true of what we said about Paul. He told that woman to, don't speak. You come out of her because I don't want people associating that with me. Certainly truth is truth, and these individuals were certainly speaking truth. But there's something about the person that's saying it that's going to be in people's minds as well. And so that's certainly the case with that one. And so let's go to John 7. If you've got that, someone read John 7, verse 30, and then we'll get chapter 17, verse 1. Somebody wants to go over there for that. John 7, verse 30, someone. Verse 30, I'll get it then. Then they sought to take him, but no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. Just like with what we talked about last week when they took Jesus up to the top of that hill to throw him off, and it says that he escaped out of their midst. Jesus came, his purpose to come was to die. That was why he came. That's why he had a body. But if it wasn't his time to die, they were not going to take him. That's why this idea that Jesus came the first time to set up an earthly kingdom and the Jews rejected him and God was caught by surprise, that's why that idea is so crazy. Because if it were not his time, or if he did not want them to do that, it wasn't going to happen. What Jesus say, no one takes my life, I lay it down freely. He's not going to do that. So his time of his death wasn't yet come, so they couldn't do it. The time of his revealing himself to all as the Son of God wasn't yet come. And so he didn't need demons being the first ones telling people, hey, the kingdom is at hand, Jesus is coming. That was John's job. That was his disciples' job. He didn't want demons or demon-possessed people being the first ones that people heard about this one who is coming. The Messiah is here. Not necessarily because it was true, certainly it was true, but the one saying it and the reputation that they had, that would have looked bad. And he understood the idea of optics and how it appears that way. John 17, verse 1, somebody.
Jesus spoke these words, lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son also may glorify you.
It wasn't time when they took him up to that hill. It wasn't time when they picked up stones to stone him. It wasn't the time other times when people were going to try to kill him. But when his time was come, he said, now it's time. Now it's ready. Now it's ready. And so these, demons or others that it was, speaking, when we read that these demons were following behind Jesus saying, this is the Son of God, do we think differently about Jesus because of that? No, because we all things have been revealed. But at the time, if the first person you heard talk about Jesus was a demon or a demon-possessed person, it might turn you off, and you'd never listen to him because, I know who was talking about him. I know where he came from. And that might be one of the reasons why the Pharisees we've already noticed back in Matthew 12, said this is done by the prince of the demons. They're trying to, poison the well. They're trying to pollute the minds of people who haven't yet heard who Jesus is. And sometimes we shut ourselves off to listening to truth by what someone else has said about it. And so that might be one of the reasons here. Questions or comments here? And I'm glad I started with this one because I've got a couple of new perspectives on this verse here that I hadn't had before. Yes, sir.
Well, Jesus is trying to build our faith. And Jesus is talking about he was still at that time trying to learn who was Jesus. It's like he was building his faith up. And that's what you build on.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. He was trying to. Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting thought as well. He said that Jesus is trying to build faith in people here, and the demons are speaking out of knowledge. They know who he is. They know more than anybody else who this is, and while that might sound like a good thing, that's not what Jesus is wanting to build faith first. And he's going to show them. He showed them lots of evidence of who he was, but he didn't need the demons being the first ones that were telling people about it. Yeah, they knew. They certainly had a knowledge. Yes, sir. Yeah, there are several. And that's not for the same reason, I think. He heals a leper. He heals others, and he tells them, don't tell people who I am. And I would be like, why would he do that? He want everybody to know. And we're not really given a reason for it. He might it might be a way of crowd control. It might be something to do with reputation. He might want to do it his own way. But, he would tell other people, don't tell people who I am. And I would think we could add yet there. Yeah.
The demons would have cast it out who he was, but that same with that. They were outcast and people had nothing to do with it. Everybody people were left and
There you go. That might be something as well. Lepers were outcasts in society, and maybe it's something to do with that with people's preconceived ideas about leprosy, being an outcast, and you want to come back into society, so you might be making up something in order to try to ingratiate yourself into society once again. Maybe there's something there. We can have certainly perspectives about that. Yes, sir, Sam.
You tell someone, I've got a secret, don't tell anybody.
I've heard that as well. You're right. The best way to tell everybody is to tell someone, don't tell anybody. And this was before Facebook and text messages and all that other stuff. Yeah, that's right. Of course, I look at it a little bit differently, and I'll say, well, Jesus told them not to tell people, and they told everybody. He tells us to tell everybody, and we stay quiet, And so rather than looking at why he told them that, I would look at why aren't we telling more people about who he is. But yeah, you're right. That's certainly, maybe it was a reverse psychology. Jesus was certainly master of psychology for sure. Anybody else? Some of these that I think we're going to go through quickly, we spend a lot of time on, and I'm glad. I'm surprised at that. Very good. All right, let's go to chapter 5, and there are probably other things in between chapter 4 and 5 that we'll get to, but for time's sake, we move on. So let's go to chapter 5, verses 33 through 35. Talk about fasting. That'll be good. Chapter 5, this is verses 33 through 35. I've got it there on the screen. We'll go through 2 pages here. And they said unto him, why do the disciples of John fast often, make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink? And he said unto them, can you make the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. Okay, our question, or perhaps our challenge, I guess you would say, is not necessarily here in the text, but the subject of the text. Let's talk a little bit about fasting today. Is it something that's commanded of us? Should we be doing it? Is it, scriptural to do it or not? What is it about fasting? Not something you hear a whole lot. Is that on purpose, or should we be talking about it more? I said 2 pages. I didn't even go to the next one. So let's go here to talk about fasting. Should we be doing that today? As with the gospel accounts, one of the reasons why we have 4 is because there are sometimes multiple perspectives of the same event. And so one of the reasons we have 4 is because sometimes they all talk about the same event, and some of them will add a detail that the others don't. And it gives us a more broad understanding of what actually happened. Whereas if one person wrote it, it's from one perspective, and we wouldn't know anything else. And so sometimes, especially the 3 that we call the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they many times will talk about the same event, but they'll add or take away details that the others don't. And so other accounts of this, in Matthew 9, verses 14 through 17, we have probably the same account. I say probably because this might have been something that happened multiple times, especially when the subject that we'll look at here in a moment. And so in here, it says that the disciples of John are under consideration. Luke, on the other hand, talks about John and the Pharisees, as does Mark. And so they're comparing different groups. We go to the disciples of John the Baptist, and the disciples of John, they fast often. Now, we said in our introduction that we talked about the different groups of the Jews, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, some of those others. We mentioned the Essenes, the group that's not mentioned by name in the gospel. But we talked about how that group were ascetic, meaning they punished their physical body in trying to get closer to God, spirituality. And so they would live out in the wilderness and eat scant things, and some people think that John the Baptist was one of them, and he was called out of that kind of that lifestyle. And so if that's true, I don't know, but if it is, that might be something to tell us why his disciples were fasting often, because he kind of came from that background where they punished themselves, among other ways, not eating much. John ate locusts and wild honey, very little as far as nutrients and that sort of thing. But it may be that that's what he was doing, and it may be why his disciples are known to be those who fasted often. And so the disciples of John fasted often. And then when we also, Mark mentions and Luke mentioned as well, the disciples of the Pharisees fasted as well. And we'll notice here a little bit what they did, but you'll recall that the Pharisees fasted not for spiritual purposes, but, for what purpose? Why did they fast? To show. Yeah, they wanted other people to see what they were doing. So everybody knew they were fasting. And so the disciples of John fasted often because you could tell just by looking at them or being around them. The disciples of the Pharisees you knew because they would put it in your face. I feel bad today because I started my fast today. And they paint themselves and make themselves look, put dirt on, make themselves look, like they're really hungry. And so everybody knew about them. But he says, but your disciples, they don't ever fast. They never do this. They never go long periods of time without eating. What's the deal? Don't you want to be religious? Don't you want to be spiritual? Why are you not commanding that they fast? So we have a couple of examples of these things happening earlier. And certainly there are examples of going long periods of time without eating in both the Old and the New Testaments. However, it's only in the Old Testament where it is commanded of the people that they were to fast during certain times of the year or during certain difficult times or situations, during prayer, fasting, that sort of thing. Anytime we see it in the New Testament, it is either, as Jesus does in Matthew 6, it is controlled. He's regulating an already practice that's already going on, or it's something as a suggestion. For example, 1 Corinthians talks about married individuals who for a time will give themselves to prayer and to fasting. Not necessarily that it's a command or something like that, but we don't really see it commanded anywhere except in time, again, when it's already going on. I want to look at that there in Matthew 6. Let's go to Matthew 6 here. and see what Jesus says about fasting. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And so he's giving certain things that they need to do in order to correct their religiosity or their spirituality. You've heard it said of old men of old do this, but I say unto you. He's not changing it to a new law. He's correcting their already what they were thinking about the law. And so here in Matthew 6, verse 16, notice, moreover, when you fast, it says there, verse 16, when you fast. Even though Jesus is not living during the Christian age, he's under the law of Moses at this time, he is regulating something that's already going on. They were already fasting. So he's saying, when you fast, you should do this or that. Be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Truly I say unto you, they have their reward. So notice he is correcting what they're already doing. When you go about your time of fasting, whenever that is, don't do it like the Pharisees or the hypocrites here that disfigure themselves and they make themselves really sad. He says because they have their reward. The reason that they're doing it, they're getting it right there. They're doing it for show. They've got their show. That's it. They don't get anything else out of it. He says, but you, verse 17, when you fast, anoint your head with oil, wash your face. We might just say clean yourself up. Don't let anybody know you're doing it. Because the purpose for it is not to be a show or be a spectacle or something like that. Matthew 6, verse 18, that you appear not unto men to fast, but unto your Father which is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. What's the purpose of fasting then? What's before we get into whether or not we should do it, what's the purpose of it? There might be a focusing mentality there that I'm constraining my urges, natural urges or something, and I'm focusing on something, usually something difficult or problematic, something else. Anybody else? What's the purpose of fasting? Have you ever fasted? I don't know if you're allowed to tell me from what Jesus says here. You ever done that before? I remember several years ago when I was in college, we had a college ministry group that met. And every Sunday we had our Bible class there. And we were talking about fasting on one occasion. And one of the couples that was helping with the college group, they have 5 children. And at that time, they were in the middle of having all of those children. And we were talking about fasting. And for some reason, the guy teaching the class looked at her and said, have you ever fasted? And she said, no, because I'm always pregnant. I can't fast, and I always laugh anytime I think about fasting. So some people can't and shouldn't, for obvious reasons. But what's the purpose of it? I like the idea of focus there. To practice self-control certainly could be part of it as well. Yeah, especially in our kind of culture today, we have more that's available to us than ever before. I think people at this time would just absolutely, in a way, freak out if they could know that we go to a grocery store and all this is available. Eat as much as you want and then some. There might be an idea of self-control there, focus on other things. When we see people doing it in the Old Testament, they are certainly focusing their minds on more important things, spiritual things. Jesus went to the wilderness and for 40 days ate nothing. And that was one of his trying events there, especially physically speaking. When we fast, if we fast, that sort of thing. Let's notice a couple of other things here before we answer that question here. Now, this passage implies, here we're talking about Luke 5 here. This passage implies what Jesus responds here, that fasting is inconsistent with the joy of being in Christ. Because his answer for them back in Luke 5, verses 34 and 35, is the reason why my disciples aren't fasting right now is because I am with them. And so fasting has this mentality, this idea of something that's sad. Those of you who have lost loved ones, close ones to you, how much did you feel like eating in the first couple of days after their passing? Not much. Did you do that on purpose? No, that just kind of comes with the idea of of being sad, of being in sadness, that sort of thing. That's one of the reasons we provide food for people, because if it's not right there in front of you, you don't feel like making it. And so you have something you at least can eat whenever you feel like it. But one of the things that we do naturally during trying times is we don't eat. And so this is a thing that we don't do on purpose. Fasting would be, but it's in order to focus on something or practice self-control. Jesus here tells them the reason why they're not fasting is because I'm here with them. There is joy in the bridegroom. Obviously, that's a response to him. Now, he said there's coming an occasion when they will fast, and that's, of course, after his death, when he's not with them anymore. When he's no longer with them, they'll fast then. But right now, there's joy. And so I would take that, and I don't think we would do any harm to the text by saying that, we have Jesus with us today, and so that might be one of the reasons why it's not commanded. Because while we might go through some sad and difficult times that require or that fasting would help, it's not something that is commanded of us because, John said, I write these things to you that your joy may be full. We may not have an occasion to do that, at least regularly. But what about whether or not we can do that? Jesus mentions an illustration that follows here. This might be another challenging passage we could look at further, but the verses after verse 35, 36, 37, 38, some of those, Jesus uses two illustrations. And he says, who takes an old patch of cloth and puts it on a new garment? And who puts old wine into new receptacle or new wineskins? Now, those of us who don't have any experience in either of those things don't really understand what he's saying there. But before the days of pre-shrunk clothing, cloth like that, clothing that has been washed and gone through all the things of that nature, it's already shrunk to where it needs to be. And then if you put a cloth, a new patch on an old cloth, when that shrinks, it's going to tear the garment. And so putting a patch on that's not a good idea. And putting old wine into new wineskins is going to cause an expansion, and the new wineskins can burst. And so whether it's wine or grape juice, that's beside the point here. I think he's talking about just juice here. But he's using an illustration here. And so the old cloth or the old patch, the old wine, that's the traditions of old. And if you try to put them on the new, which is the gospel, you're not using it for the right purpose. And so it's going to tear one or both. You're not going to use it in the right way here, as we'll see on the next page there. Getting ahead of myself here. So in that illustration, the old patch, the old wine, that's the Jewish practices, that's their traditions. So we kind of get an idea of what this fasting was about. Sure, it was commanded, but as with most things that they were commanded to do in the 14 centuries since Moses, they had taken those commands and they had really placed their traditions on it, especially the Pharisees. They had put tradition after tradition on it, and that had become more important than the original and what the original intention was. The fasting was not to show everybody how religious I am. And I haven't eaten in 6 hours. I'm really, really feeling it. It's supposed to be something that they did privately because of what it did for them mentally as an individual. And so the new garment, the new container, that's the gospel age. I'm bringing this new law, and if you take the traditions of old and slap it on the new ones, you're going to ruin both things. That's one of the ideas that we should have about our Sabbatarian brethren. You take our friends. You take the traditions of old, Sabbath and whatever else, and slap it on the new. You're going to ruin both. And so the old was coming to an end, and so those old things that were commanded are not commanded in the new. Any comments there? We'll talk about fasting today, but anything on fasting in the Old Testament or what they were doing? Yeah, go ahead.
Would you not think that in those days referred to there would still be in those days? I mean, I think back to when you have people who were making extravagant gifts and anointing Jesus, the same time things was said. Well, could this have been told to give to the poor? Jesus said it's
Yeah, but is there a command to do it regularly that we should be doing, or? Okay.
If was there ever a command anywhere that they should do it regularly? I don't know.
That they did things, yeah, maybe not. The question here is, is this like the other things that we see, that while Jesus was there physically, bodily with them, they didn't do certain things that they would later on, and that by extension we today should also be, practicing this, maybe not in a regular way, and because he's not here with us bodily. And I wouldn't have any problem with that, certainly because, as we're going to see, when or if you do it, no one's going to know about it, because it's not for other people, it's for me. And so let's just do that right here. Did you have something?
An example of how not to do this.
Okay.
Many years ago, one of my preacher friends would come and share with me, vent, if you will. And he had been out of town for a couple of weeks on a mission trip, and he got back and found out that the youth minister had conducted an event with the young people, fasting for dollars, doing the fundraiser and raise funds, so much per hour of fasting.
Okay. Fasting for dollars.
Fasting
Yeah.
for dollars. So that's probably the prime example of how not to do this.
Interesting. Fasting for dollars. See how long you can go without eating. That's problematic. That would save money on Monday night devos if Richard decided to do that. We're going to fast for our devo tomorrow night. That would save some money. I don't know. Yeah, that's certainly, and that would be a good example of a public sort of thing that's fasting there. So let's use what Wesley said there and ask, may one fast today? Whether it's ever been commanded or certainly don't see it in the New Testament. Should one fast today? May one fast today? My answer would be absolutely. The people in the Old Testament, though they were under a different law, they're the same as we are today. And if it was helpful to them for a certain reason, it would be helpful for us. However, I would have an addendum to that. Absolutely, you should fast if you would want to, but you do it like Jesus said, not like others at the time or, like you may have seen it in the Old Testament. Jesus was regulating an already practice that was in practice, something that was going on, and he was trying to change how they were doing it. And so while you could attach some kind of spirituality to this, it might be a difficult time for you. It might be something that you want to focus on improving yourself, self-control, focusing on a problem or study or prayer or something like that. Do it. But do it the way that Jesus said, because because doing it the way that they were doing it at that time was wrong, and doing it that way now would be wrong. And that's one of the reasons why we don't really talk about it, because it's supposed to be a very private thing for self-improvement, not for other people to see. It's not a public practice. It's done for something to do with self-improvement. There's no set limit for how long you can go or competition or something like that. It's supposed to be something that's private and individual. It's kind of the same way that Jesus talked about their prayers. Those Pharisees, they prayed on the street corner so that all could hear them. But when you pray, you go into your prayer closet. Don't let anybody know you're doing it. And so don't let, your light is supposed to shine. You're supposed to reflect that light, not shine it in people's eyes and blind them by it. Because we can certainly put people off with how religious we are. I don't know if y'all see them, but sometimes you see, social media and stuff, people filming themselves giving to the poor or how much they can give to this or that. That's completely the opposite reason why we're supposed to be doing that. We're not doing it for show. We're supposed to do it to help others, and in this case, we're doing it to help ourselves. So can we fast? As I've already said, if you've gone through a really difficult time in your life, you've already done it. And whether it helped you or not, that's for you to decide. But there might become something in our lives that we choose to do this in order to give ourselves to focus, self-improvement, self-control, that sort of thing. It might be part of it as well. Yes, sir, Sam.
So what would be the modern day definition of a fast?
And
2 days?
yeah, I mean, in our day, what's a fast compared? And that's another private thing, 6 hours might be tough for some, and it might be tougher for, to go longer than that. And so that's why, I'm going to go through a period where usually right now, because I'm stressed or because I am worried about something, the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking solace in food. For right now, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to spend my time in prayer or Bible study or with other people. And it doesn't have to be with food. You hear sometimes people fasting, they call it that. I've already mentioned social media, but that, other things that you give up. Usually around Lent, those, Catholic friends, they'll say what they're going to give up, which is usually, some of them give up something that they don't really use or do just to appear religious. But there's nothing wrong with giving up something that we enjoy for a time. I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to spend time in prayer or whatever it is. That can be a fast. I don't know that it has to be food, especially in this context here. So, yeah, what's a modern definition? I don't know. That would be for each person to define for himself, I guess. Anybody else? Our bell's rung. I don't know that we're going to go on to the next one here, but.
Christ, it shows how long he fasted
Mm-hmm.
after he was baptized, what he did. To make it more simple for us, we're raised with the custom, you do not be eating or pray for food. You wait after you pray.
Maybe there's something there.
Kind of like on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Fasting, like a fasting, like food. But
Yeah.
sometimes when you go and pray, you're not eating as you pray.
Yeah.
You can, but we just don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Custom goes into it.
Sure. Yeah, and that's part of it as well. Yeah, fasting it's always, I say always, most as far as I can remember, is usually connected with some sort of difficulty, problem, sadness that's there. And Jesus' point here is, I'm here with them. There's joy. There's no fasting, no need for it. But there's coming a time when they will. We'll all go through problems and difficulties where we're going to fast probably naturally, but also there are times when we can use that as kind of a tool to help us. It helped them, so certainly it could help us because, we're the same. Humans are the same. And been that way. Yes, sir.
As far as length of term, whatever, we have this part, we have an example in Acts 13, when David Antioch mentioned the Lord fasted. The Lord said, separate Barnabas and Saul for the two called them, and when they fasted, they prayed, and then they healed them. Was that still what we do? Is that like all that?
Yeah. And what a great point there. We sometimes point to things that the early church did and said, well, if we want to be like them, we've got to do what they did. Well, they fasted. Again, does that mean that we have to do it? If so, I don't see any regulation other than what Jesus says here in Matthew 6. The early church fasted. Was that something that they just did because of their traditions? Or was it something that they were commanded to do? Before a serious decision was made, they did everything they could to make sure they made the right decision. They fasted, they prayed, they consulted, the Word of God, that sort of thing. And so, is that something that before you make a big decision, do it? Absolutely, do something like that. One more thing, I'll go here, Karen.
My first question is today, and now we have a question and answer session where people put questions in the box that they're not handing out. Mine was asked.
That you got or that you asked? Oh, you were asked that. Well, good luck. I know, right? Oh, that's funny. Oh, me. Karen, go ahead.
A few years ago, Aunt Brenda's nephew, great nephew, was fasting with his youth group. And he basically passed out while driving, had a massive wreck, and he comes close to death. And he'll have issues for the rest of his life because from a brain injury.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be maturity
Yeah.
if you're going fast.
Yeah, there's said, man shall not live by bread alone. Bread's part of it. We need to eat. We do need to do that. Maturity is part of it as well. Thank you so much for your attention. Appreciate all the good comments today.